So when we begin to ask the question of why is this person wearing this particular clothing today, it may have something to do with cultural heritage, depending on what the specific item of clothing is. It may have something to do with history. Blue jeans, or Levi's, as they were sometimes called, were clothing that was invented to suit a particularly harsh working condition within a particular historical setting in the past. People liked the way they looked, and it caught on. So now there are people wearing them for other reasons, very often for reasons of preference, but not always, sometimes, but not always, for reasons of function. That you might wear jeans because the work you're doing requires clothing that is especially tough and durable and won't wear out and can deal with all sorts of abrasion, such as in a mining situation, for example, where you're dealing with sand and rock all the time. A lightweight cotton pair of slacks at that point would tear very quickly and very easily and have to be patched again. So in that particular case, a more durable, stronger clothing was needed, and so that's why it was created. Jumping to another subject, architecture often reflects this, that why is a house designed a particular way? There are styles of roofs that were designed as they are because of local tax laws where those architectural styles originated. The mansard roof, for example, has roofing that comes down to just above the first floor, so that the windows of the second floor are actually like dormers looking out through the roof. Well, it's my understanding that at the time that roofing style was created, the attic of a house was not taxed, so that if they could bring the roof down over the second floor, you could have a two-story house, but the whole second floor would be considered an attic and would not be taxed. Now, perhaps there are a lot of places where that type of roof is built because people like the look of it, but perhaps a lot of them don't know or haven't heard why that design was created in the first place. And very often there is some practical concern behind those sorts of choices. Either we wanted more space, to get around a tax law. I mean, it could be any number of things. The thing to bear in mind, I guess, is that it could be a number of things, that it's not just one thing. When something tragic happens, very often the knee-jerk response, especially of the news media, is to figure out who to blame and to assign blame quickly and right away and try to tell people why this happened in some simple, direct fashion. You know, this one thing is why it happened. In nearly every case, however, those who start digging into the story and getting behind the scenes to figure out all the different influences and contributions, all the different people whose thoughts and decisions impacted that particular event. It gets rather complicated and less certain that the one thing the media named, if that one thing were removed, that the bad event would not have happened. I sometimes joke in discussions of racism that if it would be so convenient if all of the vices of humanity were contained within the European races, European people and European races, descendants of Europeans, because then you would know who to eliminate and have a completely perfect world after that. Except that there is no such limitation to human vice, that the same sorts of problems, be it racism, dishonesty, greed, inequitable relationships of all sorts, that these exist within every race all the way around the world, that there are examples of racist behavior between different groups of Asians as much as there are between different groups of Native Americans. It doesn't matter which group you're talking about. Racism is devaluing another person based on a quality associated with race, rather than relating to them on the basis of what they said, what they did, the actions and decisions and choices of that person. Within individual family trees, there are frequently very heated disagreements about how one should live, how one should be, what choices to make, whether someone should move to the country and have a farm or move to the city and work in a factory. Because the decision-making ability varies so much from one individual to the next, it doesn't make any sense to me to blame one generation or one group of people for what the other one did, even if they're biologically related, because they still don't have the ability, the control to say what somebody else in their family will or won't do. They can ask, they can invite, but ultimately it's up to that other person whether or not they cooperate. And so when we ask, why are you the way you are? Well, how many years do you have to hear the explanation? Because there's so many influences that contribute to that. The thing about all these myriad of influences, though, is that they're also interconnected. You may have, for example, in your family tree, an uncle who has a particular way of looking at things that is different from everyone else in the family tree. If you get to spend a lot of time with that uncle as you're growing up, you may learn from the wisdom or the perspective or the way that that uncle has of relating to things. If he's an uncle you hear about but never actually get to meet, it's questionable whether his influence will be very substantial in your life, or whether he will simply be that person you've heard about but never met. So the question of why you are the way you are can shift according to how much time was spent with different sorts of influences in relationships. As in the introduction to this TV show, though, it's kind of like a row of dominoes, because there's one circumstance, and there's a circumstance that made that circumstance possible, and there's a circumstance that made that circumstance possible. As the amusing joke I heard quite a number of years ago said, if your parents don't have any kids, then probably you won't either. Maybe that's common sense, but it very much ties into this question of why. That there's a sense in which, like in the introduction to this TV show, in order for one domino to fall, it has to be hit by the domino before it. In order to start the entire sequence of dominoes falling, I had to touch the first one. If nobody had touched the first one, the dominoes would have never fallen. Unless there was some other extenuating circumstance, like an earthquake or something that would cause the table to shake. But in order for that entire progression of dominoes to fall, one had to start, and that motion had to be passed from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, all the way around the circle. And in order to witness the center domino falling, I had to be patient, and I had to wait for the dominoes to finish their falling.